Good afternoon. I'm Leon Davis. It's Saturday, June the 16th, 2 o'clock. And I am a fan of history. And by studying history, it helps me to understand people's thinking. Knowing where they started and where they ended, I can pretty much piece together their thought processes. So in creating my podcast, I try to add a little bit of history. And then before I talk about current events, and that hopefully will add some perspective to the topic and that I'm trying to cover. Today, I would like to try to cover foreign policy, U.S. foreign policy. Now, last week I did immigration, and I wasn't really quite happy with the show, so I'm going to start today's show and go back, just do a kind of a refresher about some of the things that I talked about, and bring up one point that I missed bringing up in that show. And we'll get started right now.
Welcome to Altitude Adjustment.
Alrighty. Hopefully me covering last week will be really quick, and then I can get into foreign affairs, foreign policy, pardon me. And but I do want to make note that I will be taking my summer break over the month of July and early August. So after the June 30th episode, which is next couple of weeks. Yeah, next couple of weeks. After the June 30th episode, I will be not doing podcasts until the next podcast will be August the 18th. So I did want to mention that. So quickly to go over a quick refresher about what I talked about last week is that some people felt that the immigration system was broken, and I don't think that the immigration system is broken. It is what we make it, and we can change how we implement the immigration system, so that by using terms like broken, where people are trying to steer the conversation and vilify how we're doing immigration. Hopefully our politics will start to change and it won't be so adversarial. We do so many things on an adversarial type basis. Left, right, conservative, we have a two-party system, and that's always going to bump heads because we don't try to include nuance in our discussions about whatever. It's either on or off, up or down, pro or negative. And that I can say always, but that tends to make us become more adversarial and we can overlook a lot of different viewpoints in between. But hopefully that, it's gotten us this far. Whether we continue to use it is something we should probably talk about. What I did mention last week is what are the conditions that would push people from their homes and the only environment that they have known to chase some mythical future. What would cause someone who born in a particular area and grew up and became an adult there, had children, to pick up their family, their belongings, and move from what they've known. And that should be something that we include, or at least take a look at when we implement our immigration policy. One of the things that has been come up quite a bit about our immigration policy is allowing immigrants or encouraging immigration, or even legal immigration based on someone's skills. That basically comes down to that we drain other communities of their brain power, and then we don't offer them any return. So basically, if you want to come to the United States, You either be able to bring something with you that is going to be beneficial, that we can clearly see before allowing you in. Because a lot of times there are people who migrate here who have a determination to work and be better citizens, and they bring something after they get here rather than before. But we're trying to implement or many people are trying to implement a policy based on what are your skills now. When we do that, as I mentioned, we're draining brain power from other communities because people are moving because life is untenable for them where they are. So we take the best and then we offer them nothing in return, so that even if their community starts to rebound, they have a much harder path to solvency because other countries have drained the higher performing or higher trained people from those communities. Now, one of the unique attributes of our society is that foreign policy and immigration can change every 4 years. By having a presidential election every 4 years and having election of officials in 4 to 6 years, our immigration and foreign policy behavior is fluid. That means it can change, and that becomes difficult for people outside the country. I can say difficult, but it's an additional challenge for people outside the country to see a consistent policy and know how to interact with the United States. So if immigration is more lax under a president, and then the following administration just 4 or 8 years later becomes much more strict in their interpretation of immigration, people who may have gotten information that is outdated, which is quite possible, especially if you're in an area that's hard hit by lack of resources, no internet. You've got bad people in the area that don't allow you to get to information. So you're going to have bad information, and you're going to think, I'll head towards the United States to try to, regroup and at least survive, so that I can maybe want to come back and help my community. But because, as I mentioned, we have the shifting of policy, we potentially have the shifting of policy every 4 to 8 years. Someone could show up on our doorsteps and be turned away because the policy has shifted. Now they're in a much more precarious situation because they've left everything that they've known to try to seek a better life, and then they're caught into a system that is not favorable for them. So my thought is it would be beneficial for us as a country if we took a longer view of immigration and foreign policy, so that though administrations may change, that way we don't allow one person or one party to be so dominant or so entrenched that we lose our ability to be flexible. But at still putting forth a policies and behavior that the rest of the world can count on. One of the things I also talked about last week was people go where the resources are. That is why urban areas have more people than less developed rural areas. So people are going to immigrate or migrate to areas where there's opportunities, where there's resources. If we spread the resources out, if we less concentrate resources in areas, we can then support greater migration, greater participation by people in all of the benefits of this country. But we have a tendency, because it's easier to, if we put everything in one place, it makes it simple to do things. So you don't have to go very far. You don't have to wait very long, because we have a tendency to try to have instant turnaround. You hear a lot about instant gratification. So getting things done at this very instant. So we put everything in small pockets, which become those major cities. And of course, to make all of that work, you have to have the workers, you have to have all of the resources necessary. And so we put it all in small areas. Well, people have to go to those areas. We have a lot of it is important that we do keep some areas less developed, but we can possibly spread things out a little more to eliminate some of the congestion, to eliminate some of the problems that we have. So one of the things that I didn't cover last week, which I really wanted to cover, was open borders. People talk about open borders and that's such a bad thing. And as I mentioned, people go where resources are. The point of the border is, and I did talk about that last week, is that we have a certain political system in place, and we have certain rules that we follow in order to create the environment that our citizens choose to live in. In our current immigration situation, I'm curious as to how we try to help people to integrate into the society, or do we just leave it to the individual? So if you show up on our doorsteps, let's say you become, other than the test you have to pass to become a citizen, are there other things that we do to try to help integrate people, immigrants, into society? One of the things that we always talk about, one of the things that's important is having tools that help people to adjust, whether it's adjusting from going to prison or adjusting from recovering from medical maladies. There's always got to, the success is going to be important if you have the right tools to help people move from the place of not meeting the minimum to getting them to at least be able to function well. The school system is designed, should be designed, and is designed to help people to function in society. And we're changing. I read an article recently about home ec disappearing, and there are a lot of curriculums that are being dropped that help people to adjust to society and the changes in society. And that's another one of the things that I would like to talk about, being education and how education is implemented in society, and does the system, that the way it was originally designed, still functioning well. But right now, do we have the tools that are in place to help immigrants and citizens alike function well within our society? So with that, I'm going to close immigration for now. That may be something I might want to visit later. But U.S. foreign policy, and I'll give you a little history. U.S. foreign policy for the first 50 years of our independence was guided by the idea that the United States should observe political isolationism from European powers during peacetime and maintain strict neutrality during periods of war. Military and financial alliance with France in 1778. Put 19 in there. Anyway, financial alliance with France in 1778, along with the help of Spain and the Netherlands, helped to neutralize the British naval and military supremacy and secure Americans' independence. The Treaty of Paris in 1783 was highly favorable to the United States and allowed westward expansion to the Mississippi River. In 1776, George Washington's final message counseled against foreign entanglements. It went, "Europe has a set of primary interests which to us have none, or a very remote relation. Hence, she must be engaged in frequent controversies, the causes of which are essentially foreign to our concerns. Hence, therefore, it must be unwise in us to implicate ourselves by artificial ties in the ordinary vicissitudes of her policies or the ordinary combinations and collisions of her friendships or enmities. Our detached and distant situation invites and enables us to pursue a different course." Now, the first Congress created the cabinet-level Department of Foreign Affairs in 1789. On May 19th, 1789, James Madison proposed the Department of Foreign Affairs under the leadership of a Secretary of Foreign Affairs. Thomas Jefferson returned from France to take the position, and then on September the 15th, 1789, Congress passed an act to provide for the safekeeping of the acts, records, and seal of the United States, and for other purposes. That law changed the name of the Department of Foreign Affairs to the Department of State, under the leadership of the Secretary of State. And because it was called the Secretary of State because of certain domestic duties that were assigned also to the agency. By 1797, the French were openly seizing American ships, and this led to an undeclared war known as the Quasi-War of 1798 and 99. The second U.S. President, John Adams, tried diplomacy, but that failed. And this eventually led to the Congress approving Adams' plan to organize the Navy. Through political unrest, Adams eventually made peace with France in 1800. Now, under the Constitution, the President of the United States determines U.S. foreign policy. The Secretary of State, which is appointed by the President with the advice and consent of the Senate, is the President's chief foreign affairs advisor. The Department of State, a cabinet-level department, operates under the executive branch of the government, and the Constitution authorizes Congress to oversee but not establish U.S. foreign policy except by law and approval of war and treaties. In that capacity, congressional committees question department officials about matters of foreign policy, international operations, and other subjects as it sees fit. Current U.S. foreign policy goals: national security, world peace, secure global environment, maintaining a balance of power among nations, pardon me, and working with allies to solve international problems. Now, there are three tools to help facilitate U.S. foreign policy: diplomacy, foreign aid, and military force. So some of the difficulties or some of the challenges that we face in our foreign policy, and one of them I mentioned earlier, was consistency across administrations. That because administrations change and a new administration comes into power, they may take a different tact or even a different direction in accomplishing foreign and enacting our foreign policy. Now, a dramatic policy change will confuse allies and open opportunities to non-allies that the previous policies were able to keep in check. We do need to always re-examine our foreign policy to ensure that we are using the best tactics and information in implementing our foreign policies. Now, the government is not a business, and I don't say that as an attack point, but business has different objectives than government. Businesses' objectives are profit making. The government has an objective of security, and money, though it may be a factor, it should not be necessarily the overriding idea behind the actions taken. Now, foreign policy that's based on short-term economic gain, such as in the recent situation with North Korea, where there was a mention that we should eliminate the military exercises with South Korea because of the cost, ignores a lot of other aspects of why those exercises may be important in that region. China is advancing toward its goal of establishing administrative control over much of the South China Sea. This trend is heightening regional concerns about the reliability of the United States and enhancing China's coercive leverage over the commercial and military activities of the surrounding countries. Now, if it's left unabated, the cumulative effect of China's expanding influence in the South China Sea will make it increasingly difficult for the United States to defend its interest in Southeast Asia. Now, U.S. security partnerships will weaken, and the U.S. military will be left with fewer access and presence agreements, and neither regional institutions nor international law will substantially constrain China's behavior. Now, China has a working relationship, and I have read they can't control, or they leave Kim Jong-un a lot of latitude, and I say leave a lot of latitude as if they were responsible for his behavior. As an autonomous country, he is responsible for his behavior, but they do exert a lot of influence, or because of their being one of the largest trading partners with South Korea. But China did not put Kim Jong-un's nuclear aspirations in check. They did not make that take that effort to put pressure on him. So I don't know if so I speculate. Maybe they wanted to use that to their advantage in the area. Maybe there's some benefit to them that Kim Jong-un had a program, a nuclear program, and his efforts may have helped them in other ways. So they may have just used the North Korean government, as an ally to accomplish what it is that they want to accomplish in the area. Now, despite recently closing hundreds of bases, the United States recently closed hundreds of bases in Iraq and Afghanistan, we still maintain nearly 800 military bases in more than 70 countries and territories abroad, from small radar facilities to giant installations. Britain, France, and Russia have about 30 foreign bases combined. I believe that this is not sustainable. It may not be sustainable. I don't want to say absolutely, but I believe it may not be sustainable, either from an economic standpoint or a physical one. If we cut our financial resources, such as cutting taxes, we limit our physical capabilities. We limit our financial capabilities. By tightening our immigration policy, we could be limiting our physical capabilities. It is important that we meet our requirements for implementing our foreign policy and our foreign policy objectives, along with our immigration objectives, which I believe are closely related or closely linked, because they do impact each other. Now, one alternative method is to get greater support from our allies, which you have to give Donald Trump some credit. He has mentioned that we'd like for our allies to step up and take greater effort in helping with foreign policies, dealing with other allies and adversaries. It's just how you accomplish that is going to be difficult, or the big challenge. We need to build a consensus. These are all autonomous countries, and for the ones that are sympathetic to our goals, if we don't want to continue to have 800 or close to 800 bases around the world, other people are going to have to step up. And if no one wants to help, we can't. It is going to be a significant challenge for us to be the world's police. An organization like the United Nations can be invaluable in this situation, because the mere fact that nations, and these are all independent nations, they're willing to sit down and have a conversation. That in and of itself is a monumental achievement. There is nothing specifically requiring these people or these countries to come together to try to solve global problems. And it's good that they're not taking that isolationist attitude, because the more we work together, the more likely we can accomplish things. That does allow for some additional difficulty, because the more people you have in a room, the more opinions you have in the room, and the greater chance you're going to have ideas butt heads. Now, there are only 3 countries, and I wanted to mention this, Burma, Liberia, and the United States, that have not adopted the International System of Units, that's the metric system, as their official system of weights and measures. The dollar is the default trade currency currently, but it is facing a strong challenge against the Chinese yuan. The United States is the second largest trade economy, by trailing China by $3 billion. And that our position as the second largest trading partner affects the quality of life in this country. If we choose isolationism, that could have a devastating impact on our trading ability, or on our ability to create the quality of life that we're accustomed to. North Korea has chosen isolationism, which makes it easier to implement trade barriers that impact the standard of living in that country. We have not moved to the metric system because we're big enough we have an economy big enough where we can do without it and not throw a complete monkey wrench in the situation. But if we isolate ourselves, if it's America first, America only, there's a possibility that could change. So for the next, there's 2 years left in this term, and if he gets a second term, if we get deep enough into that policy, the concern would be how much change would things change, and how quickly we could change course. A country changes course very, very slowly. Isolationism is not a foreign policy. It is an abdication of a country's global citizenship responsibilities. Also trying to be the world's police, and as I mentioned before, by trying to be the world's single-handedly police force, it's going to be fraught with problems and a huge financial burden. So we need to find common ground to at least begin a dialogue with other countries that are adversaries and that are allies, because we don't want to go it alone. We've had opportunities where we've taken opportunities to go it alone, and that has created some blowback, maybe not to the point of where we've caused pain, but it at least has caused people to look twice at us and be concerned that we're playing by our own rules and not including everyone else in how we achieve things on a global scale. I am going to, as I've gone a little bit over my time today, I'm going to pick this up next week. I've got a little bit more to talk about, but for right now, I am going to call it on this one. Give me a second here. Alrighty. Alrighty. I'm going to have to do this one from memory. I want to thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. You can replay this video podcast on YouTube search for Lions Den STL. The audio podcast is available on Stitcher.com, podcast.com, Whooshka, and the Google Music Play Store and the iTunes Store. Your likes, shares, and comments fuel the internet. So please like and share this video, this podcast, when you get a chance, or wherever you find it. And I always like to tell you that remain cool, be calm, and above all, be careful. Please look out for the other guy, because they may not be looking out for you.